The ballroom on the top floor of Blake & Co.'s New York headquarters gleamed like a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers reflected off polished marble floors, and waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne that sparkled under the light. Laughter rippled through clusters of executives in tailored suits and sequined dresses as they mingled, congratulating one another on another profitable year. At the center of the room, a sleek glass chessboard sat on a round table, its pieces positioned as if waiting for a story to begin. Olivia Carter stood quietly near the far wall, her cleaning cart parked by her side. She wore the same navy uniform she always did, the name tag slightly faded, her gloves tucked neatly into a pocket. She wasn't part of the glittering celebration, she was there to work. For the past 5 years, Olivia had mopped these very floors after hours, her presence invisible to most of the people now laughing a few feet away. "Come on, let her play," Jonathan Blake's voice carried easily over the hum of conversation. The CEO of the company, tall and immaculately dressed, stood with a bourbon glass in one hand and a smirk on his face. "We could use a little entertainment tonight." A few executives chuckled. Someone from HR stifled a laugh behind their drink. "Does she even know how the pieces move?" a vice president whispered. Jonathan gestured to the empty chair by the chessboard, like a host inviting a guest to a stage. "Step right up, Olivia. Be our guest of honor tonight." Olivia didn't flinch. Her expression didn't change. She simply set the brake on her cart, straightened her posture, and began walking toward the table. Each step was slow, steady, deliberate. A few people exchanged curious glances. Something about the way she moved, silent but assured, didn't match the way they had just dismissed her. She stopped at the board and studied it for a brief moment. The room grew quieter, though no one could say exactly why. "I'll take black," Olivia said plainly as she sat down. Jonathan blinked as if surprised she had agreed. "Feeling bold, are we?" She didn't answer. Instead, she reset the pieces with hands that moved out of habit, not hesitation. There was no showmanship, no sign she cared what anyone thought. It was as though her fingers remembered something the rest of her had long ago tucked away. Jonathan made the first move, launching into an opening he'd used countless times in Ivy League tournaments and charity events. His motions were sharp, confident, almost theatrical. Olivia responded without a word. Her moves were precise, fluid, like water meeting stone. A few people leaned closer to watch. The chuckles quieted. 5 moves in, Jonathan frowned slightly. 10 moves in, the room fell silent. At move 13, Jonathan paused. At move 19, his king was cornered. "Checkmate," Olivia said calmly. She stood, pushed her chair back in, and added, "Thank you for the game, Mr. Blake. I'll get back to cleaning now." No one laughed this time. They just watched as Olivia returned to her cart, her steps as quiet and steady as before. Jonathan stared at the board, still processing what had happened. The crystal glasses clinked faintly in the background, but the sound felt far away. For the first time that night, the powerful CEO of Blake & Co. wasn't sure if he'd been the player or the piece. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the loudest story. If this moment speaks to you, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. You never know who might need to hear this. Jonathan barely remembered the rest of that evening. Conversations buzzed around him, but none of them landed. He left the party early, the sound of Olivia's calm "checkmate" echoing in his head like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Back in his minimalist downtown penthouse, he poured himself a drink, sat at the kitchen counter, and stared at the glass chess set he'd bought years ago as a decorative piece. For the first time, it looked cheap, meaningless. He opened his laptop. Typing "Olivia Carter chess" into the search bar felt absurd, yet he couldn't help himself. Page after page came up, but none of them were about her. No social media profiles, no LinkedIn, no photos from any tournament. Just other Olivias, other lives. By 2 in the morning, Jonathan found himself scrolling through an old online archive of junior chess tournaments in New York. He clicked through grainy photos of kids with oversized glasses and proud smiles. In one picture from 2008, he stopped. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, sat with her hands folded on the table, a faint braid tucked behind her ear, her eyes steady on the camera. Beneath the photo, Olivia C. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. He realized she hadn't just known how the pieces moved, she had once been formidable. The next evening, he stayed late at the office. When Olivia came in to clean, Jonathan approached her cautiously. "I didn't know you used to compete," he said quietly. Olivia didn't look up from wiping down a counter. That was a long time ago. You were good, he added. Used to be, she said simply. Before my dad's accident, before my mom got sick, before life reminded me that hospitals don't run on dreams and little sisters don't feed themselves. Jonathan didn't know how to respond. Olivia's voice wasn't bitter. It was steady, matter of fact, like she'd repeated these words 1,000 times to herself. He found himself lingering more often in the evenings after that, sometimes staying to play a quiet game of chess with her. She never bragged, never gloated. She simply played, disciplined, precise, relentless. But people noticed. At first, it was idle hallway comments. "He's been staying late a lot," someone from marketing whispered over coffee. "I heard he's mentoring a janitor," another replied, eyebrows raised. Then the whispers turned sharper. "She must be working an angle," a manager muttered in the elevator. "Why else would the CEO spend so much time with her?" someone in HR added, their tone heavy with implication. Olivia could feel the shift every time she stepped into a room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, eyes lingered on her a little too long. The same executives who used to ignore her now greeted her with fake smiles that felt colder than silence. One evening, as she finished cleaning the executive lounge, she found a folded piece of paper slipped under her cart. 3 words, written in block letters, "Know your place." Olivia stared at it for a long moment, then crumpled it slowly. Not out of fear, out of anger. But it was the kind of anger that simmered quietly, pressing down on her chest, threatening to make her smaller again. That night, when Jonathan asked, "One more game?" she hesitated for the first time. "I've got other floors to mop," she said, her voice flat. He tilted his head. "You're upset." "I'm fine," she replied quickly. Jonathan studied her for a moment, realizing this wasn't about the game anymore. "Olivia," she met his eyes, her tone sharper than he'd ever heard. "Whatever this is between us, it's turning into ammunition for people who already think I don't belong here." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I don't get the luxury of being misunderstood and still winning," she continued. "I play one game outside the rules, and suddenly I'm getting favors, working an angle." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the ventilation system. Jonathan finally nodded slowly. "Understood." Olivia picked up her card and left without another word. As she pushed it down the empty hallway, she felt the weight of the eyes she couldn't see but knew were there. The same eyes that had dismissed her as invisible now followed her every move, waiting for a reason to drag her back down. And deep down, Olivia feared they just might succeed. Jonathan wasn't sure why he kept showing up in the executive lounge at night, long after the other board members had gone home. At first, he told himself it was curiosity, a need to understand how someone he had dismissed so easily could outplay him so completely. But as the days turned into weeks, the reason became harder to define. He started leaving the ornate glass chess set in storage, replacing it with a worn wooden board he'd ordered online, the kind used in community centers and public schools. The first time Olivia noticed, she paused at the doorway. "No more crystal and ivory?" she asked dryly. Jonathan shrugged. "I figured I should play on your terms." For a moment, she just looked at him. Then she sat down without a word. Their games became routine. He stopped trying to dominate the board and started paying attention, really paying attention, to how she played. Olivia's style was quiet but ruthless when necessary, merciful when it wasn't. She never gloated, never tried to teach him like a student, she simply played. And Jonathan, for the first time in years, felt like he was learning something real. He realized how insulated his life had been. Every move he'd ever made in business came with buffers, assistants, consultants, legal teams, layers of privilege protecting him from consequences. But here, across from Olivia, there were no shortcuts. If he miscalculated, she made him pay for it on the board, swiftly and without apology. "You play like you've never had the luxury of mistakes," he said one night after losing another match. She raised an eyebrow. "I don't. Mistakes cost too much." Jonathan leaned back, the truth of her words sinking in deeper than he expected. Over time, their dynamics shifted. The power imbalance that defined every other relationship in Jonathan's life seemed to dissolve in these quiet, late-night games. They weren't CEO and janitor anymore. They were just two people, meeting as equals over 64 squares of wood. But outside that room, the world wasn't so kind. Whispers turned into rumors. A blog post appeared online titled, "CEO Mentors Janitor for Chess Tournament, Progressive Leadership or PR Spin." Blurry photos taken through the cafe window where they sometimes practiced together made the rounds on social media. At work, Olivia felt the change like a storm cloud pressing down. Conversations cut off when she entered a room. Colleagues gave her tight, artificial smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One morning, she was called into HR. The room was white, sterile, impersonal, the kind of space where people were told they'd been restructured out of relevance. "We just want to ensure everything is professional," said a woman in a beige blazer, her smile rigid. "I clean floors," Olivia replied calmly. "And sometimes I play chess with the CEO, after hours, on his break. No money, no contracts, just chess." The HR woman tilted her head slightly. "You must understand how this appears." "I understand that appearance is often a luxury of people with titles," Olivia said evenly, rising to her feet. "Am I being disciplined?" "No," the woman said quickly. "Then I have work to do." Olivia left without another word. That night she found another note in her locker. 3 words again. "Know your place." She crumpled it slowly, her jaw tight. This wasn't fear anymore, it was exhaustion. When she walked into the lounge that evening, Jonathan was already seated at the board. He looked up, hopeful. "You're late," he teased lightly. "I've got other floors to mop," she replied, her tone clipped. He studied her. "You're upset." "I'm fine." "You're not," Jonathan said softly. She finally met his eyes, her voice sharp. "Whatever this is between us, it's turning into ammunition for people who already think I don't belong here." Jonathan leaned back, the weight of her words settling over him. "You get to be misunderstood and still win," Olivia continued. "I don't. One wrong move, and suddenly I'm the girl who got favors from the CEO instead of the woman who beat him on her own merit." He nodded slowly, realizing for the first time that his presence, however well-intentioned, was a double-edged sword. The next day, Olivia arrived to find the board set up with a single move already made. A sticky note sat beside it with Jonathan's handwriting. "I'll stay out of sight for a while, but I'm still playing if you are too." For the next 4 nights, she found a new move waiting each evening. She answered silently, making her counter-move before heading off to finish her work. It was strange, almost intimate, a wordless dialogue in the quiet of the empty office. No audience, no rumors, just the game. Yet the pressure outside that room didn't fade. Every hallway glance, every whispered comment chipped away at Olivia's resolve. She began to wonder if all of this, the games, the connection, the possibility of something more, wasn't really about her at all. Was she just becoming Jonathan Blake's redemption story? A feel-good headline in the making? One evening, after finishing her move, she lingered by the board. The fluorescent lights hummed above her as she traced her fingers over the worn wooden squares. For the first time in weeks, Olivia wasn't sure if she wanted to sit down again. Jonathan had never been the kind of man to act quietly. Every decision he made at Blake & Co. came with a press release, a headline, a calculated spin. But this time, something felt different. 3 days after Olivia had last spoken to him, Jonathan canceled 2 investor meetings and drove himself, no driver, no assistant, down to a part of the city his company had long forgotten. The community center on 53rd Street looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. The windows were cracked, the lights flickered, but from inside came the faint clatter of plastic chess pieces. Jonathan stepped through the doors and froze. There she was, Olivia Carter, kneeling beside a wobbly folding table showing a small boy how to protect a backward pawn. Her voice was warm, patient, nothing like the clipped tone she used when she cleaned the offices upstairs. A few other kids hovered around her, eyes wide as she explained the basics of strategy with nothing more than a battered wooden board and mismatched pieces. For a moment, Jonathan just watched. It struck him that here, Olivia wasn't a janitor, wasn't a story or a symbol. She was simply herself, doing what she loved in the purest form of teaching. No cameras, no applause, just impact. When she finally noticed him, Olivia stood slowly, her expression guarded. "You followed me?" she asked. "I asked around," Jonathan admitted. "They said you volunteer here every Saturday." "You stalk all your opponents?" she teased lightly, though there was no humor in her eyes. "Only the ones who make me rethink everything I thought I knew about strategy," he replied with a faint smile. Olivia crossed her arms. "Why are you here, really?" Jonathan hesitated before pulling a folded flyer from his coat pocket. "New York Open Chess Tournament. Registration closing soon." She scanned it, then frowned. "I'm not competing." "You should." I'm 30. I work nights. I haven't trained in over a decade. Jonathan leaned closer. You train every time you play me. That's not the same, she said quietly, shaking her head. Jonathan exhaled. What if I told you I already registered both our names, just initials? No one will know. Olivia stared at him. You registered me? I did. And I'm not your sponsor, I'm your student. If you say no, I'll withdraw too. But don't tell me you're not curious. Her fingers tightened around the flyer. After a long pause, she finally said, I'll consider it. But only if we train the same way. Equal ground, no private coaches, no luxury setups. I play where you play. And if I win, Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Yes? You'll stop treating me like a puzzle you need to solve. He nodded slowly. And if I win? She folded the flyer and tucked it into her jacket. Then you'll understand why it's not enough to just win. That night, Jonathan removed the expensive glass chessboard from the executive lounge and replaced it with the same battered set Olivia used at the rec center. When she entered the room just before midnight, she paused, noticing the change. No more crystal? She asked. I figured I should play on your terms, he said. She looked at him for a moment, then sat down without a word. From that night forward, they trained relentlessly. 5 mornings a week, before the city woke up, they met at a quiet cafe near Roosevelt Avenue. Jonathan traded in his luxury car for a simple subway ride. Olivia carried a worn canvas bag with a wooden chess set and a thermos of weak coffee. They played, they studied, they tore each other's openings apart. Somewhere between the blunders and the brilliant moves, Jonathan found himself humbled in ways no business loss had ever achieved. Olivia, in turn, began to rediscover the fire she'd buried years ago, the thrill of strategy, the art of discipline, the quiet joy of mastery. The tournament arrived faster than either of them expected. The New York Open was held in a converted hotel ballroom. The fluorescent lighting was harsh, the beige walls unremarkable, but the air buzzed with anticipation. Rows of folding tables stood like soldiers, each with regulation boards and plastic clocks. Grandmasters in sharp suits mingled with teenage prodigies glued to their tablets. Olivia stood near the entrance, clutching her player badge like it might explode. She wore a simple navy blouse, slacks, and sneakers she had scrubbed until the rubber gleamed. She didn't look like she belonged, but for the first time in years, she felt like she did. Across the room, Jonathan entered. No tailored suit this time, just a gray hoodie and jeans. He didn't approach her, only nodded once. She nodded back. It was enough. Olivia's first match was against a middle-seated club player who smiled condescendingly and made small talk about how brave she was to compete. She crushed him in 27 moves. Her second match was tougher. A young woman played fast, aggressively, almost recklessly. Olivia didn't bite. She slowed the tempo, broke the attack in half, and counterpunched until her opponent's clock bled out. By the end of day 1, Olivia was undefeated. But the whispers followed. Between rounds, she passed a group of spectators. Is that the janitor from Blake & Company? One muttered. She's not really self-made, another replied. You know how these stories get built. Olivia kept walking. She'd been erased before. Now they were rewriting her. On the second day, she faced a former college champion with a reputation for trash talk. He made snide comments about her posture, her hand speed, even her shoes. Olivia ignored every jab. By move 14, she sacrificed a bishop for a central pawn. By move 23, he realized the trap, too late. Check, she said calmly, sliding her rook into place. That's not check, he sneered. Olivia met his eyes. Look again. He looked down. Checkmate. The final list of semi-finalists was posted that evening. Olivia's name was there, right below Jonathan's. The next morning, she walked into the tournament hall with her chin high. Reporters were everywhere now, cameras snapping. Jonathan was already seated at board 3, preparing to face a brutal Latvian endgame specialist. Olivia sat at board 4. Her opponent, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, extended his hand with a smirk. Ready, Ms. Carter? Olivia shook his hand. I've been ready. The game began. She sacrificed early, drawing him into space he thought he controlled. Her defense was precise, her attacks timed like a song only she could hear. 43 moves later, her opponent tipped his king. A murmur rippled through the room. Jonathan looked over from his own board, grinning wider than anyone had ever seen him grin. He clapped, once, twice, then louder, until the entire hall followed. Officials handed Olivia a crystal plaque, cameras flashed, reporters surged forward. But Olivia barely noticed. She looked at Jonathan. He mouthed the words they'd agreed on weeks ago, like a stranger. And for the first time in years, Olivia didn't feel like a piece on the board. She felt like the one moving them. At the award ceremony, Olivia stood on stage, the plaque cool and heavy in her hands. The room quieted as she approached the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, some proud, some doubtful, some simply curious, and spoke with a steady voice. "The beauty of chess," she began, "is that even the smallest piece can change the entire board if it's brave enough to cross it." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, applause thundered through the room, loud, unrestrained, real. Jonathan stood among the crowd, clapping like any other spectator. He didn't smile with pride or ownership, only respect. And for Olivia, that was enough. As the applause swelled around her, Olivia stepped back from the microphone, letting the moment settle in her chest. She caught sight of the kids from the rec center. Somehow they had made it here, their small faces alight with joy and awe. Tasha, the 9-year-old who always played her knights backward, waved so hard her braids bounced. Olivia felt a lump form in her throat. When the ceremony ended, she slipped away from the main crowd, needing a breath, a moment to fold the noise into something she could carry. Backstage, Jonathan was leaning casually against a stack of folding chairs, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "I figured you wouldn't want champagne," he said, handing her one. "You figured right," Olivia replied, taking the cup with a faint smile. They sat together on the steps leading to the service exit, listening to the muffled hum of the crowd behind the curtain. "You did it," Jonathan said softly. "We did it," Olivia corrected. He shook his head. "No, Olivia, you did." She let out a quiet laugh. "You're really bad at letting people deflect credit." "I'm working on it," he replied, his grin crooked, unpolished in a way that felt human. For a while, they just sat there in silence, sipping coffee that was already going lukewarm. Finally, Olivia glanced down at the plaque resting across her knees. "Funny thing is, I didn't play that final game for glory." Jonathan tilted his head. "I know. I played it so that maybe, just maybe, a girl like me wouldn't have to wait tables in the back of a hotel ballroom while someone else took credit for her brilliance." Jonathan nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling deep. "You didn't just win, Olivia," he said quietly. "You changed the board." She looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Don't get poetic on me now." Jonathan chuckled. "Fair enough." And for the first time since that night in the executive lounge, neither of them felt like they were on opposite sides of the same board. They were just 2 people, finally playing the same game. The community gym smelled faintly of old wood polish and fresh coffee. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rectangles across rows of mismatched tables. Each one held a worn chessboard and scattered plastic pieces. The room buzzed with the restless energy of a dozen kids, their sneakers squeaking on the floor as they hurried to their seats. At the center of it all stood Olivia Carter. No longer in a janitor's uniform, she now wore a simple navy blazer, her name tag reading, Director, New York Youth Chess Initiative. It was a title she still found strange, but one she carried like armor. "All right, everyone," she called out, her voice steady but warm. "Pawns to the center. We start in 10. A ripple of excitement ran through the room. Tasha, the bright-eyed 9-year-old who once played her knights backward, waved a worksheet in the air. "Coach Olivia, I beat Jamal in 4 moves yesterday." "Are you sure he wasn't asleep?" Olivia teased, making the girl giggle. Jonathan leaned quietly against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. He'd become a familiar presence at the center, always bringing new boards, books, or snacks for the kids. Never with fanfare, never with speeches, just support. The staff had started calling him the tall guy who always loses to Coach Olivia. After class, as the kids ran out clutching their score sheets and cheap medals, Olivia walked over to where Jonathan stood. "Lurking again?" she teased. "Monitoring strategic deployment," he replied with mock seriousness. "You just like watching them get better than you." "Guilty," he said, smiling. They stepped into the tiny staff kitchen, where Jonathan poured her a cup of coffee without asking. She took it like it was habit, as though they'd done this 100 times before. "The board still doesn't know what to make of me," Jonathan admitted. "They think this whole program is some kind of experiment." "Isn't everything?" Olivia replied lightly. They want to turn this into a campaign, profiles, interviews, the works. And what do you think? She asked. Jonathan studied her face for a moment. I think if you want to spend your life building kids instead of brands, then that's what you should do. Olivia looked down at her coffee, her smile faint but real. I'm tired of being a symbol, Jonathan, of being the story people point to when they want to feel good about broken systems. You're not a symbol, he said gently. You're an engine. You keep moving and the rest of us have to follow. She chuckled softly. That's a nice metaphor. I'm full of them, he said, grinning. I should have been a poet, or at least a rook. Straight lines, no nuance. Yeah, you'd be a rook, she teased, making him laugh. Later that evening, after the last kid had gone home and the lights in the gym dimmed, Olivia sat alone at one of the folding tables. From her pocket, she pulled out a small pawn piece, scuffed, plastic, unremarkable, and placed it on the board. Next to it, she set down the carved walnut queen Jonathan had once given her. For a long moment, she just stared at the two pieces side by side. One beginning, one becoming. The gym door creaked open softly. Jonathan stepped in, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Still here? He asked gently. Still here, she replied, her gaze never leaving the board. He set a cup in front of her and sat down across the table. I saw the kids leaving earlier. They adore you. They don't adore me, Olivia said softly. They adore what they're learning to see in themselves. Jonathan leaned back, studying her expression. You know, someday they're going to tell stories about you. Not the janitor who beat the CEO, the coach who changed lives. Olivia smiled faintly, shaking her head. I don't care if they remember me. I just care that they remember the feeling of believing they could be more. For a while, neither of them spoke. The gym smelled of floor wax and chalky coffee, the kind of scent that lingers in community spaces where real change happens quietly. Finally, Olivia placed her hand on the queen and nudged it forward a single square. One day, she murmured, one of these kids is going to cross this board further than I ever did. Jonathan smiled, watching her. And you'll be there to see it. Olivia looked at him, her eyes steady. That's the plan. She left the pieces where they were, a pawn and a queen, side by side, both still in play. The night stretched ahead of them, quiet but full of possibility. Somewhere out there, a future champion was waiting. Olivia took a sip of her coffee, letting its warmth steady her. She glanced around the empty gym, folding tables still set up, sunlight fading from the windows, and felt a strange kind of peace settle over her. This wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of so many others. Jonathan stood, slipping his hands into his pockets. Same time tomorrow, he asked. She grinned. Only if you're ready to lose again. He laughed, shaking his head. One day, Olivia, one day I'll beat you. She raised an eyebrow. Maybe, but by then it won't matter. Jonathan nodded, understanding. This was never about who won. It was about everything that happened after. She didn't just win a game, she redefined it. And maybe, just maybe, the next great player is out there, waiting for someone to see them. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share it. Your kindness might change someone's life too.